Post-war America in the 1950s possessed an atmosphere of economic prosperity and happiness that rivaled that of the Roaring Twenties. This widespread happiness across the nation brought with it a sense of mass homogeneity. Unfortunately, this feeling in the American society was cut short by a newfound fear of communism in the U.S. This xenophobic mentality was the product of Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy's claims of communism in America and accusations of Americans being communists, now known as McCarthyism. These accusations of both regular U.S. citizens and government officials brought a paranoid feeling among U.S. citizens toward each other and their government, which due to McCarthy many people believed to be corrupted by communists. Although McCarthyism lasted until the mid-1950s, ending in 1954 with the censuring of Joe McCarthy, his effect on the American society is monumental. McCarthy started a widespread suspicious and untrusting feeling towards government. Some is still seen today in America, but was especially important on the issue of the Vietnam War. His strongly negative and fearful reaction to communism in America started a xenophobic mindset for the American society. McCarthy's legacy lives on through xenophobia in America and the distrust that the citizens have towards the government. Because of this, McCarthy has helped shape the American society for the past 60 years and will continue to do so, making him one of the most impactful people in American history. The event that first started McCarthyism was McCarthy's Wheeling speech in 1950. The speech helped McCarthy rise to fame, as in that he claimed to have a list of 57 known communists in America, some who, frighteningly enough, were members of the government. This speech struck fear in the hearts of American citizens, as the idea of communists in government terrified them, and their fear was increased by the hateful reaction McCarthy had to the idea of communists in the government. Over the next 4 years, Joseph McCarthy accused several more people of being communists. After they were accused of being communists, their status in society was destroyed. The former friends of the accused isolated themselves from the accused. This was because they were afraid of being associated with the communists. The accused often lost their jobs due to employers being afraid of having a communist in their workforce. Due to McCarthy, accusations alone were enough to destroy people's lives. Now, unfortunately, this is where people develop a negative view of Joseph McCarthy. Many historians believe that McCarthy was accusing people for his own personal gain and that of the Republican Party. This is shown through Arthur Miller's play The Crucible, which is essentially an allusion for McCarthyism to the absurdity of the Salem witch trials. Until recently, this is widely believed and accepted, but within the past 15 years, new evidence has been revealed. This evidence was a collection of journals kept by Joseph McCarthy and other people who worked with him in the trials on communism. These journals show Joseph McCarthy's true intent in his claims of communism in America. They show that McCarthy was a patriot who was doing everything he possibly could to protect the U.S. from communism. He wanted American citizens paranoid and fearful of each other because he thought it would further protect them from the threat that communism presented to Americans' precious bodily fluids. Although his intents were good, the fear he inspired is still hurting the American society, even today. McCarthy's reaction to communism set a precedent for how the American society reacts to a potential threat or an idea that is different from their norm. Take, for example, how the American citizens reacted to the 9/11 terrorist attacks. After it was found out that it was done by Muslim extremists, how did the American citizens treat Muslims? They avoided the Muslim citizens through the actions of only a few people and gave them very little respect. Some Americans were afraid that all Muslims were terrorists. Because of this thought, Muslims in America were treated terribly, and some still are. The accused communists in the 1950s met a very similar reaction. They too were disrespected and isolated from the American society. These reactions are both a response to Joseph McCarthy's Red Scare. McCarthy set a precedent as to how Americans are to react to things that represent a potential threat. This response to a potential threat has been crucial to Donald Trump's presidential campaign. Trump showed how Mexican immigrants could represent a potential threat to the American society in an economic way. Trump then showed how he could fix this problem by keeping Mexican immigrants out of America, which in turn got Trump's support. Because of Joe McCarthy's actions in the 1950s, Donald Trump has become a more likable presidential candidate for the American people, unfortunately. This is because McCarthy's strong reaction to communism influenced how strongly Americans in the future would react to a potential threat or anything different from what they are familiar with. McCarthy's reaction to communism set a precedent for how the American society reacts to potential threats or anything different from what they are familiar with, and this reaction has been very significant in the presidential campaign of Donald Trump and the treatment of Islamic Americans after 9/11. McCarthy also played a significant role in the citizens' mistrusting of the government. During the peak of McCarthyism, Joseph McCarthy accused several government officials of being communists, as well as members of the United States Armed Forces. The trials for the accused were televised and eventually led to the censuring of McCarthy. To many people, these televised trials appeared to be the end of McCarthyism. On the contrary, they represent the beginning of something new. These trials were in favor of the accused, meaning they weren't considered communists after, and due to how McCarthy acted during the trials, it led to him being censured. Although the trials in McCarthy's eyes were failures, they did do something extremely significant for the American society. When people found out that government officials had been accused of communism, it scared them, but it also brought a feeling of distrust towards the government. The idea of communist government made people suspicious of the U.S. government because of how bad communists were portrayed by Joe McCarthy. Although it was proved that many of these accused government officials were actually innocent, the damage was done. These accusals weakened the government in the eyes of the people and sparked a rebellious attitude towards it. This rebellious feeling helped start the counterculture movement, which only reinforced the distrust of government. This feeling towards the government is extremely important in the American society today, but was especially prominent during the Vietnam War. Many people protested against the war because they thought the government was wrong. This anti-war feeling in America is a rebellious act against the government that many citizens were untrusting of. Citizens not trusting government is still seen today in America, as many people worry if the government is infringing upon their natural rights. This feeling of distrust towards the government is a product of Joe McCarthy's trials on communism. Because he accused several government officials of communism, he helped make American citizens suspicious of the government. Joseph McCarthy is one of the most influential people in American history. Unknowingly, his trials on communism had two major lasting effects on the American society. Firstly, he caused a strong xenophobic mindset towards ideas different from the American society's norms, or anything that could represent a potential threat to the American society. This is very important in how Donald Trump's presidential campaign is going, because Trump is trying to exploit this xenophobia in order to gain votes. Last but not least, McCarthy's accusations of government officials being communists in the early 1950s started a distrust of the U.S. government among U.S. citizens. This feeling was extremely important during the time of the Vietnam War because it helped cause protests against the war. Because of this, Joseph McCarthy is one of the most important people in American history. He has had an impact rivaled by few. McCarthy will continue to shape the U.S. society through xenophobia and distrust of the government.